Obiter Solutions, a leader in secure document printing and a privileged partner in digital transformation, is proud to bring its official support to the group of SIDS Leaders Conference.
Excellencies, ministers, honoured officials from the international agencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this second meeting of the Group of Small Island Developing States Leaders, otherwise known as SIDS. My name is Juliet Foster, and I'll be guiding you through 90 minutes of lively and what I'm sure will be thought-provoking debate on the theme of pandemics, prevention and preparedness. Now, this event builds on the success of the first SIDS leaders meeting, which took place in early May. And at that time, we explored the impact of the Cotonou trade agreement on small islands. Now, as the international community begins to build a future beyond COVID-19, small island developing states are demanding a voice in contributing to and indeed benefiting from the process. But it has to start with addressing the distribution of vaccines to the largely vulnerable community of some 38 sovereign small islands across the globe. Now, to put this in perspective, a recent policy brief by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs reported that the number of COVID-19 related deaths per 100,000 people was actually higher in SIDS compared to other developing country groups and regions, and I'm including within that LDCs and LLDCs. So from the UN to the World Bank, from the EU to the various NGOs, the pandemic is seen as having not only magnified the vulnerabilities of SIDS, but has also faced them with stark choices that have the potential to cause long-term economic and social damage. A 2020 UNCTAD report found that SIDS experienced a GDP fall of 9% compared to a 3.3% decline in other developing countries. At the same time, only 6% of COVID-19 related spending for developing countries was spent on small island developing states. That's an increase of 2% from August 2020. Well, the result of this is that COVID-19 is stretching national budgets to breaking point, with SIDS having to choose between paying off external debts or preparing for another pandemic or even the next tropical storm. Well, as SIDS struggle to repair their public balance sheet, extra funds will be required to finance the immediate health response to lead the way to economic recovery once the pandemic itself is brought under control. It's fair to say that this is a truly massive task for small island developing states who rely on commodity exports, tourism, and indeed other services. So today we're going to explore whether the international community and transnational organisations recognise the enormity of the challenge and whether we're doing enough to help. And what about the vaccine programme? COVAX, the body responsible for making vaccines globally available, has approved another $775 million to fund the delivery of the COVID-19 jab to lower income countries over the next 2 years. Does it go far enough? And how much of a difference will it make realistically? Well, to debate these issues, I'm delighted to say that we have a distinguished panel of experts. They each have an allocated amount of time to give a speech outlining their position, after which they will be asked further questions. And I'd like to stress at that time that it is important for all of you to stick to the amount of time that you have been given, as there is quite a lot of ground that we have to cover in the time available. Also as well, if you could mute your microphones when you're not using them, that would also be very helpful. Now, before we hear those speeches, I would like to call to the floor the co-founder of this SIDS group, His Excellency David Doyle. He is the ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis, and he's going to share his opening thoughts and indeed some warm words of welcome. So, Excellency, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Juliet. Excellencies, distinguished guests, welcome to this Global SIDS Leaders event devoted to pandemics and its implications for small island developing states. Now, this is the second such event which brings together leading experts from the European Commission, the UN family of organizations, multilateral and bilateral organizations, along with senior ministers from the small islands to debate critical strategic issues about the future stability of this particular community. SIDS makes up something like 38 sovereign states scattered across the globe, from the Caribbean to the Pacific, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean, representing some 20% of the UN membership. It was with a view to giving these particular small islands a more assertive voice at transnational level that the GSL was initiated by the governments of St. Kitts and Nevis, the Solomon Islands, Dominican Republic, and the Seychelles earlier this year to fulfill this ambition. The GSL platform enables these small islands to articulate their strategic vision at transnational level on strategic issues such as the one we're going to discuss today, a damaging pandemic and inflicting huge economic hardship on islands with limited institutional capacity to respond. In collaboration with my co-founding partner, Ambassador Jean-Paul Catteron from the Solomon Islands, we will be rolling out future GSL thematic debates in the next couple of months on social, economic, and financial policy areas affecting SIDS. But let me leave you with one simple thought. Despite representing 20% of the UN membership, the remoteness of these small island developing states, their size, their limited institutional capacity, means that sometimes they struggle to get their voice heard at bilateral and multilateral fora. So ultimately, the GSL initiative seeks to inscribe SIDS' strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats at the heart of the global development agenda, and allows SIDS to become an integral part of the solutions to the big issues that we are trying to tackle globally at the moment, whether it be climate change or combating this pandemic. Allow me in conclusion to thank the sponsors of today's event, Aubetoir Fiduciaire and its president, Nicholas Koudros. Enjoy the event. Thank you.
Ambassador Doyle, thank you so much for that. So let's begin with our first panelist, who's the Honourable Mark Brantley. He is the Premier of St. Kitts and Minister of Foreign Affairs for St. Kitts and Nevis. A lawyer by training, he has previously served as the Deputy Premier and Minister of Tourism, Health, Culture, Youth, Sports and Community Development of the Nevis Island Administration. So, Prime Minister, the floor is now yours and you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. It is really a joy to be here and an honour to greet you, Excellencies, Ministers, and of course other senior policymakers from various multilateral organizations. I'm delighted to address you today at this session, which is devoted to global SIDS leaders and an initiative that has been started by Ambassador Jean-Paul Catteron and our own ambassador to UNESCO, His Excellency David Doyle. We are delighted to be part of this in the context of putting together for the SIDS of the world a forum where our views can be expressed. Of course, today we have been tasked with discussing this pandemic, and the world has now for over a year been beset with the ravages of COVID-19. To put this in context and being specific to the Caribbean region, SIDS by their nature are extremely vulnerable. While we recognize that much lip service is given internationally to this vulnerability, I confess that we have seen few concrete policy actions in multilateral and multinational fora to address this problem. We are a region in the Caribbean which is beset by climate change and the ravages that we have experienced there. We are, even as I speak, already in the throes of the annual hurricane season here. And we look forward each year with some trepidation to storms that are increasingly ferocious. We have droughts and other weather phenomenon that continues even now to alter our way of life, and that climate change continues to pose an existential threat to small island developing states. In addition to those vulnerabilities, we have, of course, the issue of high debt, and many SIDS and those in the Caribbean in particular suffer from high debt. Debt continues to be a major problem for us, in large measure because we are forced to borrow to rebuild after every storm, and oftentimes we are forced to borrow at commercial rates from the commercial business houses, in large measure because the world has adopted a particular stance in relation to development, and we suffer from something that is referred to as graduation, where they say to many of us that our GDP per capita passes a particular threshold, and as a consequence, we are locked out of developmental aid and concessionary financing. This exacerbates an already vulnerable problem. And we have continued to assert and continue to request of the international agencies that a vulnerability index be developed to more specifically look at our needs as small island developing states. We have, of course, in addition to that, this phenomenon that has developed where certain wealthy countries have continued to put us on lists that they compile of jurisdictions that they say are uncooperative, either in relation to tax matters or in relation to other financial matters. And that these lists developed most times without consultation with us cause irreparable reputational harm. Now, I put that by way of background to paint a picture for you of what we were already encountering as small island developing states prior to COVID-19. With the advent of COVID-19 just over a year ago, and we here in St. Kitts and Nevis had our first case in March of 2020. Let us remember that the Caribbean region is one of the most heavily dependent regions in the world on tourism. And so we have had a situation here where our tourism industry has in effect been closed down, been shuttered. Even now, it is trying to reopen, but with a contagious disease, it is very difficult to engage in tourism as we know it. And so the Caribbean region has seen its economies decimated. And in some of our countries in the Caribbean, we have had declines in GDP of double-digit numbers. For already vulnerable economies and for already vulnerable countries, this has exacerbated existing problems. We have a situation where for the first time in a century, the world is faced with a pandemic. There is no playbook, there is no manual that we could pull from a shelf. And so in many ways, countries, large and small, have been forced to grapple with the unknown. And this has created for us untold difficulties in a region where we lack the technical capacity and resources to efficiently and effectively respond. It has, in many of our countries, stretched our health systems to a breaking point. We have tried, through the non-pharmaceutical measures, to handle this pandemic to date. And of course, in more recent times, in fact, starting in about March of this year when vaccines became available, we have sought the route of vaccination. Now, the vaccination, we have been told, is our light at the end of this dark tunnel. But vaccination has posed its own difficulties. Difficulties, first of all, in availability, and difficulties, second of all, that even when they become available, there is a high degree of vaccine hesitancy in our region, where many of our people are refusing, even where vaccines are available, for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the constant flow of misinformation that we find on the internet. And so we are bedeviled by this combination of factors. I have, as I said, set out a picture of our vulnerability before COVID. COVID, therefore, has exacerbated existing vulnerabilities and rendered us in our region, and I think SIDS globally, in an even worse position in terms of our economies, in terms of our ability to respond. We, therefore, require the international community to take into account our special vulnerability. I have said in many forums that we of this region are a proud people. We are not asking for a handout. We continue to ask for a hand up. We are asking for strengthening our facilities, strengthening our technical capacity. We are asking for an awareness in the boardrooms and the executive rooms of the world where major nations meet and make decisions that impact all of us, that they take into account the very real realities that we face on the ground here of an extremely vulnerable people. A single storm, ladies and gentlemen, can wipe out decades of development in these small islands. And COVID has demonstrated that it is not just a hurricane, but it is an ongoing hurricane, because we have been decimated now for well over a year, and we continue even now to be decimated. If it is that we hold true to this notion that no one is safe unless everyone is safe, it means that there's an urgent imperative on those that produce vaccines and those world powers that control the flow of vaccines to make them available to the developing world. We have, for example, in our region, the extreme of Haiti, where up to now, a vaccine rollout has not yet occurred. Haiti is a nation of over 10 million people in the Caribbean. We have others such as Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, where the vaccine rollout has not yet reached to the numbers statistically that we would say are doing well. Here in the Eastern Caribbean, in places like St. Kitts Nevis and Dominica, we have fared slightly better. In fact, I am proud today to say that St. Kitts Nevis has, as a first jab, inoculated 69% of our target population, our adult population, and for a second jab, we are now at about 57%. But we still have some distance to go before we get to that 70% threshold that has been set for herd immunity. And there is therefore a tremendous amount of work to do to access vaccines on the one hand, and two, to combat the misinformation and combat the vaccine hesitancy that we've encountered if our people are truly to be safe. On this journey, we require a greater understanding by the international community, a greater understanding by multilateral organizations. I know that some are represented here today, a greater and better listening ear to the realities of life in our region and the fact that what appears today to be progress can be wiped out in an instant. We are in every respect on the edge, and we would like that policies, concrete policies, be developed that take into account the very special vulnerability of our region, the Caribbean region. I will leave it there. I know that time is short, and I look forward definitely to this engagement and to this ongoing conversation. Thank you.
Minister, thank you so much for that. Please don't go away yet, because I'd like to follow up on a key point which you made in that presentation. You talked about the many challenges that your country is facing in terms of rolling out the vaccines. But given those challenges, the backdrop against which you're operating, how would you gauge the progress to date in vaccinating the population? And more to the point, how far off is that population from being fully vaccinated?
Well, as I indicated, here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we've done relatively well in comparison to some of our neighbors. In fact, we are, as I said, at 69% of our adult population has already taken the first jab, and some 57% have taken 2 jabs. The vaccine of choice here has been the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And so I hope that we are close. I say I hope because some of the reasons for the vaccine hesitancy defy logic, and it make it very difficult to engage, because many members of our population hold very fiercely to notions and things that they've read or seen on the internet. And so that is something that we are battling. I would hope we have reopened our vaccination efforts starting on Thursday, that is tomorrow, and after a hiatus of about a week because we had run out of vaccines. Through engagement with Caribbean colleagues, we have obtained another 5,000 doses that we hope to start administering on Thursday. So it is my hope that within another week or two, we should get to that threshold of 70%. But of course, we understand that that is, at the end of the day, only a starting threshold, and that we have to continue the vaccination effort, which will allow us to reopen our country more fully, but also allow us critically to reopen our borders more fully and allow guests once again to come, because our industry, our economy, is so heavily dependent on tourism. Absent the tourists, it's going to be a very, very difficult road for recovery, not only for St. Kitts and Nevis, but I think for the rest of the Caribbean.
Of course, a very familiar theme that we've heard a great deal about, but thank you so much, Minister. All I can say now is have a wonderful afternoon, what remains of it, and I hope to see you again very, very soon. And to all of you, please stay safe.
Overture Solutions, leader in secure document printing and a privileged partner in digital transformation, was proud to bring its official support to the Group of SIDS Leaders Conference.